So I'm going to report the module 4. So, institutional-based corrections. Institutional corrections facilities include prisons and jails. Prisons are state or federal housing facilities that confine convicted felons with sentence typically longer than a year. So community and institutional-based corrections have both similarities and differences. The similarities in those two sanctions are that the individual is going through the treatment on the inside and they are continuing it on the outside. The difference is community-based corrections are you're either placed on parole or given probation, and institutional-based corrections means that the individual is placed in a prison or jail, which means they are housed in a secure correctional facility. So what is jail? Jail is defined as a place of confinement for inmates under investigation or undergoing trial or serving short-term sentences. Prison is a public building or other place for the confinement of person, whether as a punishment imposed by the law or otherwise in the course of the administration of justice, like the New Bilibid prison. So question, what is the main purpose of institutional correction? So corrections focus on rehabilitation and regards inmates as patients who need treatment and guidance in order to become productive and responsible members of society upon their release. So structure. A structure is an arrangement and organization of interrelated elements in a material objection or system, or the object or system so organized. So material structures include man-made objects such as buildings and machines, and natural objects such as biological organisms, minerals, and chemicals. So example of this is the correctional facilities include penal institutions, juvenile classification homes, and juvenile training schools. Whereas penal institutions are mainly for adult offenders, juvenile classification homes and juvenile training schools are a part of the juvenile correction system. So management, what is management? Management is the administration of an organization, whether it is a business, a non-profit organization, or a government body. It is the art and science of managing resources of the business. So the process of management, according to the models, requires the development of objectives. The objectives in a correctional institution in view of its main custody and treatment aims. Unlike the business sector, public correctional institution must consider the input of interested groups, formal authorities, specialists in the field, the public, and the staff and inmates in formulating objectives. So other managerial aspects to consider in developing a style include the manager's power to operate the institution, the kinds of power that can be retained or delegated by the manager, and the control of power through the control of information. So special in managerial problems involving employees of prison industries, both the inmates and the staff, are considered in terms of prison settings and constraints, and these problems involve maximization of production, staff development, working conditions, and fringe benefits, unionism, and group endeavors. So furthermore, the text discusses the constraints placed on managers by the governmental bureaucracy, which spells out the general policy the manager must follow by finance and by the community. So standard. The standard is something established by authority, custom, or general concept as a model, example, or point of reference, the standard of the reasonable person. The basis of value in a monetary system. So all prisoners shall be treated with the respect due to their inherent dignity and value as human beings. There shall be no discrimination. on the grounds of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. So the programs and services in the Philippines. The cabinet clusters, composed of good governance and anti-corruption, human development and poverty reduction, economic development, security, justice and peace, and climate change adaptation and mitigation, serves as the primary mechanism of the executive branch of directing of all, all efforts towards the realization of the social contract with the Filipino people and its five key result areas. So the good governance and anti-corruption. The good governance and anti-corruption cluster shall promote transparency, accountability, participatory governance, and strengthening of public institutions. So it shall also work to regain the trust and confidence of the public in government. So the under of the good governance and anti-corruption is governance cluster webpage, freedom of information, and the people's budget. So human development. The human development and poverty reduction cluster shall focus in improving the overall quality of life of the Filipino and translating the gains of good governance into direct, immediate, and substantial benefits that will empower the poor and marginalized segments of society. So under is Human Development Poverty Reduction Cluster, Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino Program or the CCT, K-12 Basic Education, Responsible Parenthood, Sin Taxes, Economic Development. So the Economic Development Cluster shall focus on the promotion of rapid, inclusive, and sustained economic growth. So the under is Public-Private Partnership, Philippine Development Plan 2011-2016. So the Security, Justice, and Peace. The Security Cluster shall ensure the preservation of national sovereignty and the rule of law, and focus on the protection and promotion of the human rights in the pursuit of a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. So under is the National Security Policy 2011-2016 and Pamana Program on Environment and Climate Change. So the Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation cluster shall focus on the conservation and protection of the environment and natural resources. So it shall take the lead in pursuing measures to adapt to and mitigate the effects of climate change in the Philippines archipelago and undertake all the necessary preparation for both natural and man-made disasters. So under is the Project NOAA and National Green Program. So the next is the two base approaches to corrections. The Philippine correctional has two system-based approach, namely institution-based and community-based approach, and both systems are being implemented on a fragmentary basis by three Department of the Executive Branch of the Government. These are Department of Justice, Department of Interior and Local Government or the DILG, Department of Social Welfare and Development or the DSWD, and Department of Justice and Department of Justice takers of the national prisoners. Department of Justice is under the Executive Department of the Philippine government, responsible for the upholding the rule of law in the Philippines. So it is the government's principal law agency serving as its legal counsel and prosecution arm. Next is the DILG. DILG is the Executive Department of the Philippine government responsible for promoting peace and order, ensuring public safety, and strengthening local government capability aimed towards the effective delivery of basic services to the citizenry. So under the DILG are the PNP, BFP, and BGMP. So the Philippines Department of Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD, is the executive department of the Philippine government responsible for the protection of the social welfare of rights of Filipinos and to promote the social development. So the Bureau of Corrections, or RA 10575. The Bureau of Correction is an agency of the Department of Justice which is charged with the custody and rehabilitation of national offenders who have been who has been sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment or more. The agency has its headquarters in the New Bilibid Prison Reservation in Muntinlupa. So the principal task of the Bureau of Correction is the rehabilitation of national prisoners. The Bureau carries out the following tasks to carry out its mandate: confine persons convicted by the courts to serve a sentence in national prisons, keep prisoners from committing crimes while in custody. So what is custody? Custody is the state of physical holding or controlling a person or piece of property or having the right to do so. A person who has custody over the property or another person often has affirmative duties to protect and care for those in their charge. In the law, custody is used in criminal and family law. So example of this is the child custody. Child custody is a legal term regarding guardianship, which is used to describe the legal and practical relationship between a parent or guardian and a child in that person's care. So what are the three types of custody? So there are three forms of joint custody, which are physical joint custody, when the child spends significant amounts of time with both parents. Legal joint custody, where both parents make decisions over a child's upbringing. And last is joint physical and legal custody. Custody, security, and control of prisoners. BGMP is mandated supervise and control the administration and operation of all district, city, and municipal jails nationwide with pronged tasks of safekeeping and development of inmates. So what does PDL mean in jail? April Roche Ayangwa revealed that they no longer use the term inmates, but persons deprived liberty or PDL. Instead, for those who are still awaiting judgment or undergoing trial. Prisoners are those who have already been convicted by the court. So care and treatment of prisoners. So treatment is for illness and disease. Care is needed to support conditions that we must live with because they cannot be cured. So the rules are based on obligation to treat all prisoners with respect for their inherent dignity and value as human beings, and the prohibited torture and other forms of ill treatment. They offer detailed guidance on a wide variety of issues ranging from disciplinary measures to medical services. So healthcare at least equivalent to that in the community should be available free of charge to all detainees. The health service should address prevention of disease, health promotion, as well as the treatment of mental and physical illness. Since prisons are closed settings, the healthcare facilities and healthcare staff must be situated within the prison perimeter so that they are readily accessible at all times of the day and night. So they needed healthcare facilities. Every prison must have a healthcare service at least equivalent to that available in the community that is accessible free of cost of all detainees without discrimination. The role of the healthcare service must not be simply curative, but the prevention, treatment, and care of physical and mental illness, as well as health promotion amongst the prison population. The facilities, equipment, and medical supplies must be adequate to provide these health services to the size of prison population. Due to the closed settings of prisons, emergency facilities must be available on site and staff trained and regularly updated in their use. Next is the healthcare staff. The number and specialty of the healthcare staff available will be dependent on the size of the prison, but a minimum there should be generalized must be general physician and sufficient nursing staff to meet the daily needs daily needs. So the healthcare policies is um, the aim their aim is to ensure that the national health policies and programs and standards are applied equally in prisons, and that the prison health staff have the same level of training and support and access to facilities as their colleagues working in public health structures in the community. So release of prisoners good conduct time allowance, or the GCTA. So Republic Act 10592, or the Good Conduct Time Allowance law, allows for a reduction of sentences of persons deprived of liberty, depending on how well they abide by rules and regulation inside any penal institution, rehabilitation or detention center, or any other local jail. So the application of the GCTA law resulted to the supposed erroneous release of at least 1,914 inmates, a large majority of which already surrendered or returned to government custody at the behest of the best at the behest of the presidential of President Duterte. One returnee is Antonio or Tony Simulata, who has spent close to 30 years in detention. So a few months in jail while the murder case was pending, a few months in the Sablayan prison and penal farm, and more than 25 years in the maximum security prison in the National Bilibid in Muntinlupa. So Tony was released by the virtue of the application of the GCTA law, but voluntarily returned 2 months ago. So Tony used to be a farmer before he was convicted of homicide, arson, and murder. He was committed to prison at the same time and graduated from the military academy. He was in death row. His sentence was commuted to life in 1998. Got married 2001, became a father, and turned to God while in detention. He was beneficiary of the GCTA law and enjoyed his liberty very briefly. He returned He returned to detention as he and his wife looked at the unfortunate situation as a blessing and an opportunity to serve others. So in the Bible, Hebrews 13, chapter 13, verse 3 tells us, continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with, with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So who has the authority to grant GCTA? So whenever lawfully justified, the Director of the Bureau of Correction, the Chief of the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, and or the Warden of a provincial, district, municipal, or city jail shall grant allowances for good conduct. Such allowances, once granted, shall not be revoked. So the prohibited acts subject to disciplinary action are participation in illegal sexual acts, public display of pornographic materials, obscene language or using profanity words, and displaying any behavior which might lead to disorder or violence. Possession of articles posing a threat to prison security or maligning or insulting any religious belief or group, giving gifts, selling or engaging in barter with anybody, gambling, loitering, rendering personal services to or requiring personal services from inmates, tattooing himself, engaging in business or profession from within. So self-discipline. To achieve its purpose, discipline shall be firm to ensure safety and good order in the prison. So procedures for handling disciplinary cases. So first is a written complaint shall be filed with superintendent by the aggravated inmate or by any inmate or prison personnel having personal knowledge of the incident. The complainant shall sign the complaint and shall describe the violation and names of possible witnesses. Second is the superintendent conducts initial investigation and if the complaint is found to have basis, shall endorse the case to the Board of Discipline for hearing. Third is the Board Discipline shall decide on case within 5 working days after the termination of hearings. Fourth is the hearing is summary in a nature and not bound by technical rules of evidence. Number 5, the inmate charged shall be allowed to present evidence in hearing. And 6, decision of the board discipline is subject to review and approval by the superintendent whose decision is final. So BGMP RA 6975, an act establishing the Philippine National Police under reorganized Department of the Interior and Local Government and for other purposes. It is hereby declared that the policy of the state promote peace and order, ensure public safety, and further strengthen local government capability aimed towards the effective delivery of the basic services to the citizenry through the establishment of a highly efficient and competent police force that is national in scope and civilian in character. So the police shall be organized, trained, and equipped primarily for the performance of police functions. It is national scope and civilian character shall be paramount. No element of the police shall be military, nor shall any position thereof be occupied by any active members of the armed forces of the Philippines. So the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology in Section 60 composition, the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, hereinafter referred to as the Jail Bureau, is hereby created initially consisting of officers and uniformed members of the Jail Management and Penology Service as constituted under Presidential Decree Number 765. So Section 6, the powers and functions. The Jail Bureau shall be exercise supervision and control over all city and municipal jails. In Section 62, organization, the Jail Bureau shall be headed by a chief who shall be assisted by a deputy chief. So the Jail Bureau shall compose of city and municipal jails, each headed by a city or municipal warden. So in Section 63, establishment of district, city, or municipal jail. There shall be established and maintained in every district, city, and municipality a secured, clean, adequately equipped, and sanitary jail for the custody and safekeeping of city and municipal prisoners. Any fugitive from justice or person detained, awaiting investigation or trial or transfer to the National Penitentiary, or violent mentally ill person who endangers himself for the safety of others. So in Section 64, rank classification. For purpose of administration, supervision, and control, the rank classification of the members of the Jail Bureau shall be as followed. So first, director. Next is the chief superintendent, senior superintendent, chief inspector, senior inspector, senior jail officer for 4, senior jail officer 3, senior jail officer 2, senior jail officer 1, jail officer 3, jail officer 2, and jail officer 1. So Republic Act 9263, an act providing for the professionalization of the Bureau of Fire Protection and the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, amending certain provisions of Public Act 6975, providing funds thereof and for other purposes. It is provided for under Public Act number 6975, otherwise known as the Department of Interior and Local Government Act of 1990, that the task of fire protection and jail management and penology shall be responsibility of the Bureau of Fire Protection or the BFP, and the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, or the BGMP. So treatment of special needs or unusual offenders. So special needs offenders require extra attention while in prison because they are vulnerable due to their gender, physical and mental disposition, and other social status. So, who are considered special offenders? Special offenders impact our correction in many ways. Mainly, they require special handling under correctional supervision. These offenders include juveniles, drug offenders, varying gender differences, HIV-infected inmates, and the mentally ill. So, emergency plans. An emergency plan specifies procedures for handling sudden or unexpected situations. So, the objective is to be prepared, prevent fatalities and injuries, reduce damage to buildings, stock, and equipment. So, jail and prisons, state, state and federal, public and private, must maintain essential functions in the event of an emergency. So during an emergency, the BGMP, local jails, and prison must still carry out the tenets of their respective mission. Movement or transfer of prisoners detainees. Movements, internal, directed, and specified. These procedures cover the following: managing prisoner movements, unlock regimes, and prisoner work party handover, prisoners at risk of themselves, segregations of prisoners. So these procedures are designed to ensure that movements are coordinated, documented, supervised, and managed to ensure prisoner safety and compliance with custodial requirements and reintegrative services. Prisoners at risk themselves are identified on reception and are managed to minimize their risk of self-harm. Requests for segregation are completed appropriately in the direction and recommendations. So transfers, all prisoners are assessed prior to transfer. So routine transfers, a prisoner can be transferred at any time. Prisoners are responsible for telling family where they are. Common reasons for a transfer include access to services and facilities, rehabilitation, and progression to a lower security prison. So the prisoner is inducted at the new prison and property and improved telephone list transferred with the prisoner. Security classification transfers. Towards the end of the sentence, a prisoner may be transferred to a lower security prison. Misconduct at a lower security prison may result in a transfer to a higher security prison. So requesting a transfer. A prisoner may want to transfer to another prison to be closer to the family or their home community. A prisoner who wishes to be transferred should speak to their case manager and ask for a request form. Privileges of detainees and sentenced prisoners. So what is detainees? A person who is detained specially, a person held in custody prior to trial or hearing. Sentenced prisoners are either serving sentences imposed by courts or are in prison because they have not paid their fines. So prisoners' privileges. Rights are guaranteed to all prisoners, but access to many prison privileges is based on behavior. So other common privileges include access to entertainment, work, and money. Many prisons have televisions in common areas, but some inmates may have one in their cells to pass the time. Depending on the status of their imprisonment, they may also be allowed to work. Generally, prisons cannot choose their assignments or refuse an assignment, and the wages they earn for work are well below the minimum wage. Most work occurs in the prison or jail, though sometimes inmates may be granted to work release, which allow them to do work such as trash collection outside the facility. Another common privilege is access to personal money that can be used to purchase items from prisons, commissionaries such as cigarettes. So not all prisoners may be granted at the same privileges, or they may be granted a limited privilege. Behavior is often the deciding factor in which prisoners have which privile- prisoners prisoners have which privilege, and criminal history and prison security concerns can be factor as well. Unlike privilege, all prisoners are to the sa- to guaranteed the same rights for the term of their incarceration. The Regional Rehabilitation Centers of Youth. The RRCY is a facility designed to provide intensive treatment in a residential setting for the rehabilitation of CICL or child in conflict with the law, whose sentence have been suspended. So the specific objective assess the CICL in gaining insights into their behavior and attitudes to help them become more productive and responsible individuals. Redirect their behavior and attitudes to help them become more productive and responsible individuals. Provide opportunities to acquire social occupational skills and improve self-image, and provide activities that would help them develop trust for others. So the target clientele is the RCICL or child in conflict with the law, age 15 years old, 15 years to below 18 years and not more than 18 years old. Male who have committed an offense and ordered by the court to undergo rehabilitation at a DSWD facility. So the Child and Youth Welfare Code, children are among the most vulnerable members of society and need special protection. Nearly 20 million children live in our country, and it's our shared responsibility as parents, families, communities, and government to ensure that all our children are safe from harm and grew up in nurturing environments. So, other Presidential Decree number 603, otherwise known as the Child and Youth Welfare Code, and issued in December 1974, legally defines special categories of youths, including youthful offenders, and directs the Ministry of Social Services and Development to provide comprehensive services to assist in youth development. What is the main principle of the Philippine Child Youth Welfare Code? The child shall enjoy special protection and shall be given opportunities and facilities by law and by other means to ensure and enable his fullest development physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, spiritually, and socially in a healthy and normal manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity appropriate to the corresponding developmental stage. So what are the children's rights? Children's rights are entrenched in Section 28 in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution of South Africa. These rights in the best interest of all children under the age of 18 years old. So understanding the children's rights, Section 28 of the Bill of Rights entitled Children says every child has the right to a name and a nationality from birth, family care or parental care, or to appropriate alternative care when removed from the family environment, basic nutrition, shelter, basic health care services, and social services. Be protected from maltreatment, neglect, abuse, or degradation. Be protected from exploitative labor practices. Not be required from not be required or permitted to perform work or provide services that are inappropriate for a person of the child's age or risk the child's well-being, education, physical or mental health or spiritual, moral or social development. Not be detained except as a measure of last resort, in which case, in addition to the rights of a child enjoys under sections 12 and 35, the child may be detained only for the shortest appropriate period of time, and has the right to kept separately from detained persons over the age of 18 years old, be treated in a manner and kept in conditions that take account of the child's age, and have a legal practitioner assigned to the child by the state and the state expense In civil proceedings affecting the child, its substantial injustice would otherwise result and not be used directly in armed conflict and not be and to be protected in times of armed conflict. Death row, also known as the condemned row, is a place in a prison that houses inmates awaiting execution after being convicted of a capital crime and sentenced to death. The term is also used figuratively to describe the state of awaiting execution, being on death row, even in places where no special ability or separate unit for condemned inmates exists. So in the United States, after a person is found guilty of a capital offense state where execution is legal penalty, the judge will give the jury option of imposing a death sentence or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. It is then up to a jury to decide whether to give the death sentence. This usually has to be an unanimous decision. If the jury agrees on the death, the defendant will remain on death row during appeal and habeas corpus procedures, which may continue for several decades. So question, is there a death row in Philippines? Adopted on March 2nd, 2021, this bill comes after of President Rodrigo Duterte's unflagging and sentence to reintroduce the death penalty to the Philippines, despite the country having abolished the capital punishment for all crimes in 2006. And how long do you live on death row? Death sentence prisoners in the US typically spend more than a decade on death row prior to exoneration of or execution. Some prisoners have been on death row for well over 20 years. So these are the example of the death row. So they live in there for like 20 years from their sentence, and they will live there until their death. That's all. Thank you.